Hello, it's Morris here, and today we'll be looking at the runes for Mech Dusk and Dawn, and also the neutral runes and charms for Axie Infinity Origins Season 2. So let's just get right into it. So Mech is one of the 3 secret classes, and so they don't have any cards and they only have runes. So there are 3 rare runes for each of the secret classes as well, and so the first one for Mech is Trap Nullifier. And it says when the battle starts, add the tech to your deck. This Axie's card gains 5% bonus stats. So the tech is a card that basically has retain, which means this card will not be discarded from your hand at the end of the turn, so basically you get to keep it in your hand. And what the tech does is that it can target any enemy and remove a secret on the target. So it's basically about removing secret. So in a way, basically, this gives you a 0 cost card that allows you to remove a secret from a target. And to be honest, I feel like this could even be like a downside because it dilutes your deck. You're getting like a 0 cost card that doesn't really do much, even though it has retain, so at least that kind of helps. And sometimes you do want to get your Axie's card as opposed to this 0 cost card. And also the Axie card bonus is also not that great, it's only 5%, so it's really something that is just like a starter kind of rune, and I don't think anyone would want to actually run it once they get better runes. And next we have Zarb Armor, and this says this Axie deals 10% bonus damage and takes 20% less damage when it is shielded. So of course the text looks pretty good, right? Dealing extra damage and taking less damage, but of course the condition is quite tough. So I can imagine it can play it actually at more like a backline or like in the mid, where you have other ways in which you can gain shield. You can actually deal 10% bonus damage, but then if you are in the mid or the back, then you might not be actually taking damage. Then taking the 20% less damage while shielded is not really useful. If you play at the front, then the shield will probably get broken pretty easily unless you just have like a pure shield kind of deck. So yeah, it's actually pretty hard to use. I guess one thing it could synergize well is with Cocoon. So I can imagine you can put Cocoon on your Zarb Armor Axie, and then you can actually get this bonus, at least the attack bonus. And also I guess the initial hit where you are shielded, and so you do take 20% less damage until the opponent breaks your shield. Okay, next up we have Steel Skin. It's a new rune, but it has already been some changes, and now it says this actually takes 10 less damage from direct hits. So to be honest, it's not quite clear what direct hits means, and I assume it's more like a single attack hit that is not AoE or not multi-hit kind of card, but maybe I'm wrong as well. But let's just say it is a single attack kind of hit. Then let's say if the opponent is hitting you for 60 damage, then you actually only take 50 damage because you take 10 less damage, and so that's actually like a 16.7% damage reduction, which is pretty good. Let's say the incoming damage is 80, then now you're taking 70 damage, so that's 12.5% damage reduction. And when you get to 100 incoming damage, then you'll get a 10% damage reduction basically. So in a way, it's definitely better against opponent with lower attack, whereas if the opponent has really high attack, especially like rage kind of thing, then Steel Skin doesn't do that much. Okay, next we have the Epic and Mystic runes, and they are all solo as usual. Solo meaning only one Axie per team can have this effect activated. And first up we have Adaptive Program, and I quite like this one, and it says solo. This actually gains 25% bonus shield from cards, and I assume it's from any Axies. So cards from any Axies would give this Axie 25% bonus shield, which is pretty good because basically you can think of it as also something like a 25% damage reduction, because let's say if the opponent hit to the shield, you get 25% more shield, right? So yeah, so I think that's pretty good. And it also says whenever this Axie gains at least 99 shield, gain 2 energy fragment, and I think this is really the key effect because it actually allows you to ramp pretty fast. So I assume the 99 shield is from any kind of source and it's after the buff that this rune gives. So for example, if you play a 70 shield card, because of the buff you actually get 87.5 shield, so that is pretty good. But I think the key breakpoint is that if you actually apply an 80 shield, then the buffs actually makes it 100 shield, and basically it will just gain 2 energy fragments just by using an AT shield. So AT shield is not difficult with charms, so I think actually it can be a very good ramp tool as well as just a defensive tool. So I can imagine, let's say if you play 1 AT shield and this gives you 20 energy fragment, then 5 1 cost kind of shield card can basically give you 15 energy fragment, which basically gives you the first energy burst. I can imagine you just spend the first 3 rounds playing shield and then you already get to the energy burst, so I think that is pretty strong. Okay, next up we have Lens of Truth, solo again, and this says, this Axie's attack cards remove 1 secret from its target. Deal 15% bonus damage against enemies with no secret. So you can see that mech is more like a secret removal kind of thing, and in this case, if the opponent doesn't have secret, you deal 15% bonus damage, which is not too bad. And actually I don't quite know about the order of this, so actually let's say if the opponent has 1 secret, right, then this actually removes that 1 secret and then it will deal 15% bonus damage. Not too sure, but regardless, I think it's okay, but it's not too strong. It's okay, like dealing 15% in general, because usually opponent doesn't have secret. If the opponent has secret, then actually it's also not bad. You don't actually get the bonus damage, I would assume, but you do get to remove the secret, which is still not bad, I would say. So I would say this is not particularly strong. It's not a game breaking, but I think it's like an okay kind of rune. Okay, finally we have shield backup, and this could be game breaking, not too sure, but let's just go into it. It says solo, this Axie's shield cards gain 20% bonus shield. So yeah, 20% bonus shield is already not too bad, and in this case it's this Axie shield card, meaning you can actually use this Axie shield card to shield other Axies, and it will gain 20 bonus shield. But then of course the flip side is that if other Axie shield card applying on this Axie that has shield backup, then it won't have that 20% bonus. And then it says this Axie takes 20% less damage when it's shielded. So I think that is pretty strong, because let's say if this Axie has quite a lot of shield cards and it uses shield on itself, and when shielded it takes 20% less damage, so it kind of adds up, right? So it, in a way, can kind of think of it as like a 40% kind of effect, because you're taking 20% less damage and you're gaining 20% more shield. And I feel like the game breaking mechanic is not those two, but it's actually the last sentence where it says when your opponent's turn ends, this actually retains 50% of the shield, which is already better than before. Before it says 100%, which I won't say game breaking, but it's like, it can be very annoying. It can get to like hundreds, maybe even 1000 shield. Well, of course now only 50% of its shield, so it's a lot harder to get to those very high numbers for the shield. But one thing that I've seen is actually that you can actually put 10 stacks of cocoon, because 1 stack of cocoon gives you the ability to retain 5% of the shield, and 10 stacks give you 50%, and I assume this actually stacks with shield backup, and basically if you have 10 stacks of cocoon and if you have shield backup, it basically goes back to the original shield backup, which is that you retain 100% of the shield, which can be very annoying, especially for teams that without any dispel, then once they get to 10 cocoons, then they can just like stack up a lot of shield. Yeah, just out shield you. And also, of course, now you know that shield can actually do damage through tassels as well, so I think this could be a possible way in which you can build your team around this. Okay, next we have Dusk, and the first one is Dark Flame. I quite like this name. And it says when your battle starts, add Purge to your deck. So what Purge is a 0 cost skill card, and it has Retain as well, and it says target any enemy, in this case dispel the target 1 time. So in this case you can see that Dusk is about dispelling the enemy, and what Dispel does is that it removes 1 random buff from the target up to 3 stacks or 3 turns. So it's basically about removing the opponent's buff. And it says this Axie's card gain 5% bonus stat, which is, to be honest, not too much, so you probably don't want to run it. And it basically has the same downside as the one for Mech, where you're just diluting your deck in some way. Okay, next we have Wicked Ward. And this one, it says whenever this Axie plays a card that grants curses, all allied units gain 10 shields, and that includes summons as well. So yeah, I think it's quite interesting, because I guess it can actually go into one of those curse synergy kind of build, but the problem is that actually the effects is not that strong. Let's just say you play 1 card that grants curses, then it actually gives you like 30 shield, assuming all the Axies are alive, which is okay, I would say. So in a way, adding 30 effect per card is not bad, but of course it's shielding everything, but a lot of the times the shield is not really used because the opponent is not hitting into it. So I think it's like an okay rune for a rare rune, but definitely in terms of power level it's not too strong. And it is a plus 30 effect against AoE per card used, so in a way it can be pretty good depending on the matchup. Okay, next we have Cursed Ritual. And what it does is that when your turn ends, the closest enemy Axie takes 3 damage per curse card in your opponent's deck. So again, it's a curse card kind of thing. Synergizes quite well with curse cards in general because we've actually seen quite a bit of curse synergy. So let's say the Jinx stuff or even the Goo stuff, right? So this can go into those decks where you're really dealing quite a bit of damage per round. So let's say if you have 5 curse cards in your opponent's deck, then the opponent will be taking 15 damage per round. If the 10 curse card, then it will be like 30 damage per round. And assuming that there are 10 curse card, then you can actually get to like 300 damage. So for this rune, so which I think is not too bad. But do note that the cap is 30 damage. But I think it's relatively reasonable just because getting 10 curse cards in the opponent's deck is already not that easy. And if you already have 10 curse cards in the opponent's deck, you're already doing quite well, I feel. So yeah, so 30 damage per round can add up over multiple rounds. Okay, then let's look at the Epic and Mystic. So first one is Malediction solo, and it says this actually deals 15% bonus damage against debuffed enemies. And this actually takes 15% less damage from debuffed enemies. So basically it's all about a debuff synergy. If the enemies are debuffed, let's say if you apply weak or apply bleed or other debuffs, then Malediction could be pretty good. And obviously poison is the main one that Malediction has been used as well, because it allows this actually to deal with 15% bonus damage, and also I think more important is taking 15% less damage. And I think poison, to be honest, is really the key one, just because you can stack them up, and usually it's very hard to get rid of the poison stacks. And actually it can also synergize quite well with Gloomy Dice, as you'll see later. Okay, next we have Moonlight Thief, and it's a new rune. It says solo. When your turn starts, steal 1 energy fragment from your opponent. When your turn ends, this actually heals HP equal to 3 times your energy fragment. And I think this is pretty good. So first of all, it's stealing 1 energy fragment every round. So it kind of has 2 effects, right? Because it slows down your opponent ramp, and so maybe you'll delay their energy burst by 1 round. And it also gains you energy fragment as well, so it might allow you to get to energy burst 1 round earlier. So in a way, you can think of it as like a 2 energy swing. And of course, if it drags on for longer, it could be more as well. So I think 2 energy swing is already pretty strong, because you can imagine it's like a 120, 140 kind of effect. Just because 1 energy, you usually deal like 60 to 70 damage. And also, don't forget about the heal as well. I think the heal could be quite significant, because let's say on average you might have like 10 energy fragment or something, then you're healing like 30 HP, then over 10 rounds, let's say you can actually heal for like 300 HP. So in a way, it can add up as well. So I think this rune is actually going to be very strong, very disruptive, gaining you energy and healing at the same time. Might see nerf, I'm not too sure, just because I feel like this is actually very strong. Okay, finally we have Gloomy Dice, and it's the Mystic rune, and it says solo. When your turn starts, during odd rounds, randomly apply Hex or Fear to all enemy Axies for 3 turns, and it's very annoying to play against, because so every other rounds you apply Hex or Fear to all enemy Axies, and it's also for 3 turns, and I think this is actually could be quite significant, especially synergizing with things like Malediction. So there's definitely quite a bit of this debuff synergy, but also curse synergy as well, just because let's say if the opponent has Hex and Fear and they have to play like a corresponding card that shuffles the confused card into the draw pile, then it basically adds to the curse card count. And what I should say is that Hex and Fear are debuffs on the enemy axis, and what Hex is that whenever the target uses a non-attack card, shuffle a confused into its draw pile. And Fear is the same, except that whenever this unit uses an attack card, shuffle a Confuse into his draw pile. So it's kind of random. So sometimes it could be like a high roll where you're playing against aggro and you just apply fear to everything. But of course you have low roll as well. Let's say if you're playing against aggro, you apply Hex, then it doesn't really do anything. But I would say it's definitely kind of like a tilt generating kind of effect for the opponent who's playing against Gloomy Dice, because there's quite a bit of RNG involved. Okay, next we have the Dawn runes. First up we have Divine Ring, and this is when the battle starts, add Purify to your deck, and what Purify does is that it has Retain, similar to the other two classes. But this time it says target any ally, remove one curse from your draw or discard pile, then cleanse the target one time. So basically it has two effects. It removes one curse card, I would assume, from either your draw or discard pile, and then it says cleanse the target for one time. So what cleanse does is that it removes debuffs from the target up to 3 stacks or 3 turns. So I would say pretty nice, but again it kind of dilutes your deck, so it's probably one of those starter runes that you will probably play it because there's nothing else, but if you get some other stronger runes you probably play those instead. Oh, and there's another additional effect, which is that this Axie's healing and shielding cards gain 5% bonus stats, which I don't quite get because for the other two classes it says this Axie's card doesn't specify what cards, whereas for Dawn it's only healing and shielding cards that gain the bonus, so not too sure why they do that, but it is what it is. Okay, next we have Arcane Protection, and this one has been pretty strong in previous seasons and it's basically the same now, and it says take 5% less damage per buff or secret on this Axie. So in a way it kind of changed because it says or secret now, so even if you put secrets it kind of counts as a buff in this case. And of course once you have 4 buffs and or secrets, then it gives you 20% damage reduction, and the cap is at 20, which is fair because otherwise it'll be too much. And I feel like it could be pretty good, especially with Cocoon, where Cocoon can actually retain your shield and then you take less damage as well. And I can imagine this go well in like a sustain kind of deck, if sustain is even a thing anymore. But still, I think it's a very good damage reduction. So it really just depends on whether sustain could be good. Okay, next we have Rejuvenate. So it's a new rune and it says this Axie's healing and shielding cards gain 10% bonus stats and apply one cleanser to the target. So quite like this one in the sense that basically it's giving the healing and shielding card some bonus stats, which is not bad, but also adding cleanser, and I think that could be pretty good, especially against opponent that relies on debuff. So I'm thinking about like things like bleed kind of thing, where then you're basically stopping opponent from getting bleed. Also quite hard for poison as well, because let's say every time you use a shield card you're basically applying a cleanser, it kind of basically stops the opponent from putting more poison on you. So I actually quite like it, maybe like as like one of those tech rune where you are just putting in a team that might be quite weak to debuffs, let's say like weak to poison or something, then this might actually be useful. So I quite like this one. Okay, let's look at the Epic and Mystic runes. So first one we have Heaven's Echoes. So again, all of them are solo, and it says after this Axie attacks, until your turn ends, other allied Axies deal 15 bonus damage. So every time this Axie attacks, then for the rest of the turn, then your other allied Axies will deal 15 bonus damage, but not this Axie, so it's only the other Axies attacking will deal the bonus damage, which is still not bad, I would say. And also, whenever this Axie uses a skill, other allied units gain 15 shield. So again, it's about ally stuff, so this actually doesn't gain any effect. So of course, if this is the last Axie standing, then this rune doesn't really do anything. So you can see it's more like a support kind of Axie, and so let's see actually what's the effect, right? So assuming you're more like an attacking kind of thing and you're using it as like an attack buff, then okay, let's say if you have 3 energy turn and you use 1 energy to use this Axie's attack, then you have 2 energy left, and let's say if you do a 70 damage kind of attacks, then effectively, because you are gaining 15% damage, so you're gaining about 21 damage for that whole turn, which is okay because let's say if you have 10 turns, then it's like a 210 damage kind of thing overall for the whole game. Okay, and let's say if you are using it as like a shield, right? Then because you're shielding 2 other Axies and it's gaining 15 shield, then you're basically granting 30 shield per skill card used. And of course, that's actually assuming there's no summon. If you have summon, it actually shield the summon as well, which I think could be pretty good. And if you are actually using 3 skill card in a turn, then you're basically giving an extra 90 shield for that turn, which is actually pretty good. But of course, you're giving it to 2 other Axies, and usually only 1 Axis will get hit. So in that way, maybe you can think of it as like a 45 shield instead of 90 shield. But of course, against AoE, then that's basically a 90 shield per turn kind of thing if you're just using 3 skill cards. But of course, that's like the best case scenario. But still, I think every skill card play giving you a 30 shield can be quite significant. Yeah, so I quite like this kind of supporting kind of rune, but it might be a bit hard to actually build a team around it. So I'm not too sure. Yeah, I haven't really seen this used too much, but we'll see. Next up, we have Healing Force, and what it does is that it's just solo. When your turn starts, heal all allies for 8 HP, then deal 4 damage per ally unit to all enemies. So you can see this one is all about allies and allied units, so that means including summons, and it's really more about summons. Okay, let's just say assuming no summons, then it actually heals for 24 per round, which is already pretty good because let's say if you have 10 rounds, then it's like 240 heal overall. And on top of that, there's also the AoE as well, because let's say if you just have no summon, you have 3 Axies, then it's really dealing 12 AoE, and so it's like 36 damage every round. So in a way, you can think of it as an extra half an energy per round, and I think this one also has pretty big potential, especially in kind of AoE build, right, where you're just like doing AoE and you're keeping all the Axies alive and just dealing massive damage all across the board. And of course, if you have summons, I'm thinking about Robin especially, so Little Robin is very strong here in AoE builds in general, I feel, because it's also doing a lot of AoE as well. Even though now it's more like a bomb kind of thing as opposed to adding to your damage right away, but still I think having summons, let's say if you have actually 3 summons, then you are actually doing 24 AoE across the board, and that's like 72 damage per round. And yeah, that's basically like a whole energy kind of effect. I think the key is really about thinking about using like a summon build, and if there's like a summon build, which at the moment there's really not that much, but if there is, I think this is gonna be a pretty good rune. Finally, we have Holy Prayer, and it's the Mystic rune, and it says solo. When your turn starts, remove up to 2 curses from your deck. While there are no curses in your deck, your Axie's card gain 10% bonus stats. And I think they meant all your Axie's cards. So basically, if you have no curse card in your deck, right, then all your Axie's cards actually get 10% bonus stats, which I think is very strong, because it's not just buffing itself, but it's buffing the whole team, and of course it stacks with other buffs from other runes as well. So yeah, I think this one is very strong. And also, okay, so let's say if the opponent has curse card, right, it's actually removing up to 2 curses per round, and that is very significant, because basically it's just kills, I won't say kills, but basically let's say if there are teams that rely on Jinx or Good, then yeah, those strategies definitely would not work against Holy Prayer. So it's a very strong tech rune, especially against team that relies on curses. But yeah, the other effect of gaining 10% I think is just still very strong, because basically, right, assuming that you have 3 energy and each energy you use like 70 effects, be it heal or shield or attack, right, basically this rune gives you 21 effect per round, and of course 10 rounds will be like 200, so that's actually pretty good, I would feel. Like, then that's like a base level, and I think being able to attack against curses is also another bonus. So yeah, so I quite like this one, especially as like a support kind of Axie. But having said that, it's not like game breaking in the sense that like it's not like Endless Anger where it can kind of like do massive damage. So I guess that's the downside of this particular rune. Good support, but I think it's kind of a bit fair, except for of course against curse kind of team. Okay, finally we have the neutral. So let's look at the neutral runes. So basically for neutral runes, you can actually equip it on any Axie, so meaning Axies of any class. So first up, let's look at I think these are called common runes. I won't spend too much time on it. So basically the effects is pretty weak. Kind of shows you like the mechanic of the game. So first up, we have Leftover Potion. It heals this Axie for 3% of its max HP every round. And so yeah, 10 rounds is 120 HP-ish. Is okay, yeah, not bad for a common rune. And then Tough Strike is more about attack. And it says this Axie's attack card deals 10 bonus damage. So actually can kind of add up to about 84 damage in total if you play like 12 70 damage card from this. Of course there are stronger runes out there, so this is kind of like an introduction in a way. And similarly for Thick Shield, it says this Axie's gain 10% bonus shield from cards. So similarly about like maybe 84 shield in total for one game. So again, more of an intro kind of rune. Finally, we have Mini Legion. But actually for Mini Legion, I think it is kind of like a unique kind of rune because there's actually not that many runes that specifically talks about summons, and this is one of them. And it says this Axie summon gains 8 bonus max HP. So in a way, it actually can be okay because for the rest of it, it kind of is not going to be played just because there are other stronger runes. So for this one, it actually gives the summons like extra turn in a way. So when I say summons, I mean those 24 HP summons, and giving them one extra turn could be quite significant. Of course the power level is still very low, but still like it at least has like an unique effect that maybe it can get used in some very niche summon deck. Okay, so let's actually look at the rare runes which might see play. So first one is Energy Shard, which is a new one, and it says when this battle starts, gain 1 energy fragment, which is just like literally just 1, which is actually not that much. And it says whenever you create an energy burst, heal this Axie for 40 HP. And in a game, you usually only do 1 energy burst, to be honest. If you happen to be in a ramp kind of team, then maybe you'll heal for 80, which is still not really that great. And getting 3 energy bursts is really quite difficult. If you get there, yes, it heals for 120, but it's actually not that significant compared to other effects. So yeah, I don't think it's that strong. Next up, we have Pure Power. Okay, so for Pure Power, it says this Axie's attack cards have 15% class bonus. And what class bonus is that it increases the attack, heal, or shield of a card if it's used by an Axie of the same class as itself. Meaning, let's say if you are using a plant Axie and a plant Axie has a plant card, then it will get the class bonus. So, but of course in this case, Pure Power only applies to attack cards. So basically this Axie's attack card, if they're the same class as the Axie itself, then it gets 15% bonus, so which is not too bad, because let's say if you play 12 70 damage card, then you get 126 damage in total for the whole game, which is alright, but of course again not the strongest, and you probably play other runes once you have it. Similarly for Pure Skill, so in this case is this Axie skill card have 15% class bonus, meaning mostly the heal and the shielding card. So again, about 120 shield or heal bonus that you get in total for this game. I guess okay for a rare rune, but definitely you want to use other stronger runes. But having said that though, you can think of it as like a 15% bonus attack and 50% bonus shield or heal, which some classes might not have those effects. So in that sense, I can see that these two could be played in some sort of niche kind of team, where some Axie just needs extra healing or just needs the extra bonus damage, but that class doesn't have the runes for it. So maybe one example would be things like, I'm thinking about like a plant kind of team where you're using like an aggro with Leafy, but then it doesn't really have that much kind of attack rune bonus, and so maybe you want to use Pure Power just so that you get extra attack. So that is like a one angle to look at it. Okay, finally for neutral runes, we have epics and mystic runes, so all these have solo as well. And the first one, Pure Instinct, it says solo, other allied Axie's card have a 10 bonus class bonus. So in a way it's kind of like a worse version of the Dawn Mystic rune, but not strictly. But it is all about the other allied Axie as well, so meaning it's a supportive kind of rune. Of course it stacks up with other effects on the other Axie's rune as well, so basically it's just giving the other Axie's an extra boost, and in this case it's class bonus and it's 10%, so it's only when the other Axie's uses the cards that are the same class as the Axie itself. Let's say if you play actually 24 cards with this effect, and like let's say each card has like 70 effect, then you actually gain about 168 effect in total with this rune for the whole game. Then yeah, I think it's okay for an epic rune, and I can see that it could go quite well in like a support kind of Axie. Even though I think it is quite a new mechanic, so it's gonna be quite hard to see where it kind of fits. Okay, next up we have Last Wish, and I think this one I quite like. And it says solo. This actually gains 30 bonus max HP, so it's already a 30 effect kind of thing already. And increasing max HP is actually pretty good because it allows you to survive an extra hit sometimes. And it says when this actually dies, 8% of its max HP is granted as shield to other allied Axies, and dealt as damage to all enemy Axies. And actually there's a bit of a buff already, which I'll make another video to talk about this. But at the base level, just based on this particular text, well, there are 3 aspects basically. So firstly, you're gaining bonus max HP. Then you're granting shield to all allied when this Axie dies. And thirdly, it does AoE damage to all enemies Axies as well. But do note that's only Axie, so it doesn't deal with summons, but still, it's still a pretty strong effect. So let's just say this Axie has 430 HP, which is the kind of the base level. Then it basically will do 34.4 AoE. So in a way, if the opponent has 3 Axies, that's about 100 damage, which is already pretty good. Plus also about 68 shield as well, so it's 172 effect in total. Of course, you can boost the max HP up as well. Let's say you can actually boost it up to like 500. That's basically doing 40 AoE, and that means like 120 damage and also 80 shield, and that's like 200 effects in total for this rune. So I would say not bad, and that's on top of the bonus max HP as well. So that's why I think Last Wish actually can be pretty good. Finally, we have Shady Exchange, and I think this one has been a pretty strong rune, and the good thing about Neutral Charm is that it can actually be put on any Axies as well, so that's why I think Shady Exchange will see play quite a lot. And what it does now is that it says solo. When the battle starts, shuffle 3 voids into your deck, so that's actually the downside. But the upside is that when your turn starts, gain 3 energy fragment. Wow, and that is actually a lot. So every round you're gaining 3 extra energy fragment compared to your opponent, so you're basically going to ramp up a lot faster. So in a way, it's similar to before, where you're going to gain extra energy compared to the opponent, but in this case you're going to gain permanent energy, even though you don't gain it right away, but after you get energy burst, then you'll gain the energy permanently. I can see that after 3 rounds, you already get 9 energy fragment, and plus playing like 6 other cards, then you basically already get energy burst after 3 rounds, and I think that's pretty crazy. Not sure if they'll actually tune it down to maybe like 2 energy fragment, because I do feel like this is actually going to be very, very strong. And I won't say it's essential, but a lot of teams would want to play it just because it just gives you such a big advantage in terms of energy. Okay, but let's talk about the flip side. The flip side is that it shuffles 3 Void into your deck, and Void is a curse card, so it basically kind of makes your draw worse. So that's the flip side, but also it says when drawn, reduce 2 energy fragments. So basically you're actually losing 6 energy fragments through the Void, but of course there are ways in which you can remove a curse card from your deck. But even if you get that 6 energy fragment, there's like 2 rounds of ramp from this. Effectively, I think of it as after 2 rounds, then it starts the effect of gaining 3 energy fragment, which is still pretty good, I feel. Yeah, I think Shady Exchange might be a must-have in a lot of teams. Otherwise, it might not be able to compete with the extra energy that the opponent will have if they run Shady Exchange. Okay, let's look at the neutral charms. And for neutral charms, actually now they've actually made this new change where potential points from different classes can actually all be used on a single charm now. Of course, here is all mostly 1 cost charm. That's a 2 cost charm. So let's say you have 1 bug and 1 plant potential point left. So you can actually use those to equip your Charm of Vitality 2, which uses 2 potential points. So I think that's a pretty good change. But in general, if you have some leftover kind of potential point, and let's say if the class doesn't quite fit, and you might equip one of these neutral charm, but otherwise you probably want to equip a class charm just because those are usually stronger than the neutral ones. And basically the neutral one covers pretty much everything: HP, single attack, multi-hit and AoE attack, shield and heal as well. But usually you probably won't want to equip these charms. But for the special neutral charm, I think some of them are going to be seen pretty often. So first we have pre-order attack, and now it's only 2 potential points. Enhance any card, meaning it can be put on any card. It puts innate, so that is actually quite strong because you can start your battle with that card, but now the flip side is that card's energy cost +1, and actually this hurts it so much that it might not even get played even with 2 PP. Maybe only a very fringe kind of scenario where you actually want a very specific card to start in your hand despite having to cost 1 energy more to play it. But otherwise, it's not something you're going to put on in any random kind of cards. Okay, next up we have Earth Stamp, and now it says enhance single attack cards only, so you can put it only on single attack cards, and it says this card targets a random enemy. So in this case, instead of targeting the front, it really targets a random enemy, which I think is a good change just because most cards by default target the front anyway. So I think changing it to random enemy at least gives it some effects. So okay, yeah, but I don't see it played that often just so because it's quite a lot of RNG involved, so I personally don't quite like it. And then we have the Moon Stamp. So for Moon Stamp, again, only single attack now, so this is actually quite a big change just because you can't actually use it on multi-attack cards. So you can't put it on something like randomly deal 3 hits kind of card and divert into a single target because you can only put it on a single attack card. And one notable one I think is Pocky, just because now it's actually deals 2 hits, so you actually can't specify where the taunt will go from the Pocky. I think it's kind of like a significant change. Okay, but for Moon Stamp, what it says is that this card targets the second closest enemy, and cards base stat -10%. But usually when you put this kind of charm on, you don't really care too much about the damage or the base stats, but more about the effects. So for example, putting sleep on the opponent, you want to put the sleep on the opponent not on the front axis but on the second or the furthest axis so that your future attacks won't wake the opponent up. Yeah, so I think it's not bad, I would say. Next one of Sun Stamp is similarly enhance single attack cards, and this card targets the furthest enemy. Card space stat -10%. Similar to Moon, an opponent can play around it by using summons, by putting a summons at the back. Of course, let's say if you have a Moon Stamp instead of a Sun Stamp, then opponent can just play the summon in the corresponding position to play around it. But still, I think it could go with particular cards, especially those that put the opponent to sleep or something. And next we have Energy Drink S. I think there's already been a change there, but I'll cover it in another video. But for now it says enhance any card and add degrade, and cards base stats +20%. So actually it basically buffs that card by 20%, which is quite a lot. I think they kind of tune it down a bit. But it does have degrade, which means when your turn ends, if this card is still in your hand, instead of being discarded, this card is exiled and a confused card is shuffled into your discard pile. So as long as you actually play the card with this charm out, then actually this doesn't have any downside, and so that's why basically putting 20% for only 3 potential points is actually very strong. And so I feel like, yeah, I think tuning it down probably is the right move. Then next we have Scotch Tape, and Scotch Tape has been very good and is still very good I think now, especially with the new mechanic where you can equip neutral runes with potential point from any classes and mix classes potential points as well. Yeah, so basically what Scotch Tape does is that it can be put on any card, and it says add retain, which means this card will not be discarded from your hand at the end of the turn. So basically you put it on one of those cards that you actually want to keep, so that you only want to play those cards at a particular point. Then putting Scotch Tape on ensures that you will be able to keep it until the point where you actually want to play it. So I think very strong, and in a way I quite like that it's an epic charm, so it's actually not as hard to get as before. So yeah, I quite like that, and I do think that you'll probably see quite a lot of people running Scotch Tape. And next we have Rocket Stamp, and it's one of the Mystic neutral charms, and it says enhance single attack cards, and again so can't be played on any multi-hit kind of card. And it says this card can target any enemy or ally. So interestingly, it can also make this card target ally. I'm not too sure if there's any scenario you want to do it, but maybe you do. It does say cards base stat -15%. So yeah, I haven't really thought about the targeting ally part, just because maybe you can put some buff on ally or something, not too sure. But usually cards will put debuff on the opponent, so you don't want to put debuff on your ally. And maybe there'll be some fringe scenario, but I can't think of anything yet. But if you do, let me know in the comments below. And this one actually has quite a significant penalty as well, because it says cards base stat -15%, but it does allow you to target any enemy. And it also override the card text in a way. Let's say if the card text, let's say just target the front or target the back or target front and back or something, you can actually use the rocket stem to actually target the mid as well. Yeah, so I can imagine you can put it on like a shrimp where usually you can only target the front and the back, or maybe even if there's some flinch scenario, you actually want to use something like a shrimp to actually target your own ally, to apply taunt to your own ally so that you can protect your front or something. So that could be some sort of use case. But yeah, there's definitely a lot more use cases that I haven't thought of yet. But do know there's a Mystic Charm, so it's actually not too easy to get, but still, effect could be pretty strong. Finally, we have Energy Drink M, and it says enhance any card at banish. Cards based at plus 25%. So it's actually quite a big plus, it's 25%. But of course, the downside is banish, so meaning you can only use it once, and after that, it'll go into the banish pile. Still, adding 25% for like a burst damage kind of thing could be pretty good. But also, of course, there are cards that you might just want to banish so that you thin out your deck as well. So maybe like a one-use kind of thing, and then you just don't want to use it again. Especially maybe something like an early game kind of thing, and then it might not be good late game. And you just want to thin out your deck so that you actually draw into better stuff. But yeah, I think the 25% can actually add quite a bit. It's just that you can only use it once. And that is it for the runes for the secret classes and also the neutral runes and charms. Thank you very much for joining me again, and do check out my other videos on the runes, charms, and cards of the other classes in Axie Infinity Origins Season 2. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.